What's up, everyone? Today I'll be talking about the differences between living in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, Brazil, especially from the perspective of a gringo, a foreigner. I think a lot of people that watch this channel want to get some information about Brazil. So I will give my opinion, my perspective, and also a framework for helping you think about the two cities. If you want to move here or if you want to travel here, I hope this video will help you. I love both cities. I've lived in Rio and I've lived in Sao Paulo. And of course, Brazil is much more than those two cities, but they're the two biggest cities. Probably the two most important cities. Maybe you could make a case for Brasilia, which is the capital, and a lot of decisions are made in Brasilia. So that could be another video. And also, I will make another video about the other cities you should visit in Brazil or possibly move to. I live in Sao Paulo right now, and it's a very exciting city. It's a very interesting city. But let's start with a few different criteria to help you make your decision. So, first, let's think about climate. Climate is an important factor when you move to a place. And both cities have a pretty good climate. They are definitely places that snowbirds can live. Snowbirds meaning people trying to escape the winter in the northern hemisphere in the United States. In the United States, people used to leave New York and go to Florida for the winter. That's, of course, a possibility. But you could also go to South America. But Rio is much hotter than Sao Paulo. The city of Rio is much hotter than the city of Sao Paulo because they're both actually states. And Sao Paulo does have beaches with similar climates to Rio. Rio is on the coast; it's a beach city, where Sao Paulo is in the mountains. It's at a higher altitude, so you can actually get a little bit of a colder winter compared to Rio. Rio, the people from Rio are called cariocas, and they will complain about their winter when it's really like 23 degrees Celsius. If you were from New York or New Jersey, you'd probably still go to the beach in weather like that, but usually cariocas will avoid the beach in their winter. Remember, it's opposite hemisphere, so maybe June, July, August, kind of. I would say they don't even really have a winter, just a slightly colder season. And the summers can be really intense in Rio. You definitely want to be at the beach, be at the pool, or avoid midday heat. They have a famous phrase and saying that Rio 40 graus, meaning Rio 40 degrees, just I think that's Celsius, of course, which is I think about 100 degrees. It's kind of used to describe the intensity of a Rio summer, not just the temperature, but also how crazy Rio can get. So for climate, I think, especially when you consider winter, Rio has a pretty nice climate. You can really do things outside all the time. Rio does kind of have a rainy season, and when it rains in Rio, there's not too much to do. Sao Paulo, it rains much more often, but Paulistanos, as the locals are called, kind of figured out a way to work around that so the city doesn't stop in the rain in Sao Paulo, where in Rio it feels like the city stops completely in the rain. They're both pretty good climates. If you don't want to be cold ever, go to Rio. If you want more mild summers, maybe Sao Paulo is the place for you. Let's talk about beauty. I think Rio is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, not necessarily from an architectural perspective. I don't think they have too many interesting things in terms of architecture. Their historical city center is kind of interesting. Rio used to be the capital, so they have some beautiful buildings in the city center. But it's a beautiful city because of its nature. It's surrounded by Atlantic rainforest. It's really, really beautiful. And Sao Paulo is not the most beautiful city, I would have to say. That's not its strength. It has some nice neighborhoods, some interesting architecture, and definitely some cool places to go. That people love to go places in Sao Paulo because they don't have the beach. So there's a lot of cool restaurants. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say cool shopping malls, but and that's from my perspective. But they do have some nice luxury shopping malls. And Sao Paulo, the people like to go out to restaurants, and so they have a really nice infrastructure for restaurants. I think some of the best restaurants in the world, when you talk about bang for your buck, what you can get for your money, are in Sao Paulo. So they have a lot of good restaurants, a lot of creativity. I think Rio is pretty focused around the beach, so it's great. You always have something to do. You could always tell your friends, hey, let's go to the beach, I'll meet you there in 20 minutes, and you always have the beach. But because of that, because it's so focused around the beach, I think some other options are kind of not available. So if you open a luxury restaurant in Sao Paulo and you do everything right, you have a chance, pretty good chance for success. But in Rio, you're always competing with the beach. So anything you do is going to be in competition with the beach. So it's kind of harder to open those kind of luxury places. So if you're a person who really wants to experience luxury places, wants a diversity of things to do, Sao Paulo might be more interesting for you. But if you're a person who just loves the beach, wants to play soccer at the beach or volley, which is a mix of soccer and volleyball that you play with your feet, or altinha, which is basically juggling in a circle, or they have all different types of beach sports, and it's a great vibe. It's really great. So if that's something that interests you, Rio's the place. I know people generally think, oh, Rio is much more fun than Sao Paulo. That's kind of the image. That's kind of the what people would say that don't know both places. And I would say Rio is really fun. And if you're going to visit Brazil for a short amount of time, I would definitely focus on Rio because it's pretty easy. They have good infrastructure for tourists because they do get a lot of foreign tourists because it's so beautiful and it's so iconic and it has that whole history. Sound like when you think of songs from Brazil, you're gonna think of the girl from Ipanema. Ipanema is one of the beaches in Rio. There's no equivalent song in Sao Paulo that was successful internationally. So Rio is definitely a great place to spend a week. But when you're living at somewhere and you want a diversity in places you can visit and a diversity in different, I think you can find more diversity in people as well in Sao Paulo because they have a stronger middle class. They have much. One thing that's a huge victory for Sao Paulo would be the business community. Rio does have a few businesses and a lot of like kind of businesses that work with the state. It used to be the capital of the country. So Petrobras, which is the I don't know if it's state owned. I think it's like semi state owned. It's not 100% state owned, but that's in Rio. So Petrobras is one of the most important things in Rio. Then Globo, which is the biggest news entity, is located in Rio. So you're going to get a lot of people that work in the oil industry, and you're also going to get a lot of people that work in television and movies and all the not all the a lot of movie stars actually live in Sao Paulo and work in Rio and vice versa. But you will see a lot more movie stars and telenovela stars in Rio than in Sao Paulo. But the engine of Brazil is Sao Paulo. It has the most diverse business community. So you'll find a lot of people that work at interesting jobs, different types of jobs. It's kind of like New York City in that sense, where everyone's working in different types of jobs. Where if you go to a smaller city in the United States, there's one or two big players where people could work, and that's it. So Rio is a great place, but it does lack in a few things because the beach is so important. The beach is so important. Of course, some people from Rio are going to tell me, oh, that's not true. I'm from Rio and I don't go to the beach. But I don't think they could honestly say that the beach is not an important part in Carioca culture. So, business community, if you want to do business, I would be in Sao Paulo. And also because Rio, again, you're always in competition with the beach. So do you want to work? Do you want to sit in your room and do the work or sit in your office, do the work, or do you want to go to the beach? I've never been able to work in Rio. I've tried and I've never been successful. In Sao Paulo, I could sit in my apartment all day and work all day and not really have a problem. And then maybe at night, go out and meet some friends. We're in Rio. It's pretty easy to call up your friend or if you're walking for lunch and a friend meets you and say, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to play Altinha, which is the soccer game, or we're going to go to the beach. We're going to do this. So it's kind of hard to refuse those invites. So that's one challenge I've had with Rio. But it's definitely, and let's talk about safety. Rio has an image of being much more dangerous. A lot of people from Sao Paulo will even say, oh my God, Rio is really dangerous. I can't believe you go there. And the fact is, Rio is more dangerous than Sao Paulo. You have a different criminal element in Rio than in Sao Paulo. I'm not going to get too into details on how the gangs work, but basically in Rio, there's more factions fighting over territories, where in Sao Paulo, it's run by one organization. It's a huge international organization, and they kind of keep the streets. Well, they at least make sure there's no infighting among groups. But definitely both places you could get robbed. Both places are kind of dangerous when you think about if you're coming from the suburbs of the United States, you will think both places are very dangerous. If you compare Sao Paulo to like Philadelphia, Philadelphia will have a higher homicide rate in Baltimore and places like that. So it kind of depends, but it's definitely a place you need to be careful in both places. But Rio is more dangerous. And most of Rio happens in the south zone. So most of the time in Rio, you're going to be in the Zona Sul, which is a few different neighborhoods: Leblon, Ipanema, Copacabana, Leme, Botafogo, uh, Flamengo, and then you start getting towards the center. And then you have the north zone of Rio, which doesn't get a lot of tourists. I've been there. It's definitely authentic Rio, but it's usually not a place that tourists will visit. It's a completely different Rio. It's another video I could talk about a different day, but I'm not prepared to compare the south zone and the north zone of Rio right now. So it feels much more like a bubble, a small bubble in Rio, because you're going to be in those areas where Sao Paulo has many more neighborhoods. They have many different like nucleuses of people, different types of neighborhoods, and they have like 4 or 5 different business centers. So they have the historic center, which actually I think is slightly more dangerous during the day than in Rio, because Rio's historic business center is still their basically their only business center. Maybe have some other places in Barra de Tijuca, which is a newer neighborhood, kind of built in the same style as an American gated community suburb. But most of the businesses are still located in the center of Rio. Where in Sao Paulo, most of the businesses left the center of Sao Paulo. So during the day, it kind of feels like a ghost town, and you could definitely get robbed at that time. But there are like 4 or 5 other different business areas. They have their Wall Street, which is Faria Lima, and they have Avenida Paulista, which is another one of their business areas. So definitely more neighborhoods that you could consider living in Sao Paulo. And that might actually make finding an apartment a little bit cheaper, because in Rio, you're competing with tourists, and you probably want to live in the South Zone, which is much smaller. So I would think Rio, the areas where you want to visit and live in Rio are probably more expensive than Sao Paulo, because you can probably find more options. So both cities are relatively expensive. If you're considering backpacking, you can definitely find cheaper cities, but they're both wonderful cities to visit, a lot of fun things to do. And I hope this helped. Maybe if you're planning a trip, let me know, and I can give you some more tips. Peace.